What is the link between the mysterious Buga sphere that fell from the sky, an ancient pyramid buried in the jungles of Mexico, and a framework of esoteric triadic logic? That's a trick question. I can only point out links. You have to decide what they mean, so let's think. One is a modern enigma, broadcast across news feeds and social media. Another is a forgotten monument, dismissed as ceremonial architecture. The third, a conceptual tool for reasoning through complexity. But together they form something greater, a system, a signal, a rediscovered intelligence that may stretch across centuries. What follows is not fiction. It's not theory. It is a step-by-step reconstruction of how three seemingly unconnected domains, magnetism, memory, and mathematics, collide in a single coherent explanation. A message, long delayed, may finally be delivering itself, and the clues begin here. The year was 1969. In the humid lowlands of Tabasco, Mexico, a small team of researchers stood at the base of a great mound, Mound A2, the tallest structure at the ancient Olmec site of La Venta. Unlike the jaguar carvings or colossal heads that had drawn archaeologists here for decades, this mission had no shovels, no picks, only a compact magnetic sensor, a proton precession magnetometer, and a systematic plan to sweep the earthen pyramid meter by meter, reading invisible traces in the Earth's magnetic field. At first glance, the task was simple: detect subsurface features without excavation. But what they found wasn't simple. It wasn't even ambiguous, it was strange. As the team moved across the summit and flanks of the pyramid, the magnetometer readings began to change, not gradually but sharply. A sudden spike in field intensity, a precisely bounded zone of magnetic deviation, stronger than the surrounding field by several hundred nanoteslas, focused and dipolar. As if something hidden beneath the soil was not just present but structured, an intentional configuration exerting a directional force on the world above. Frank Morrison, geophysicist, and R.F. Heiser, renowned Olmec archaeologist, published their findings in Science in 1970. The magnetometer data revealed a distinct rectangular magnetic feature near the center of the pyramid, estimated to lie 4 to 5 meters beneath the surface. Modeling the anomaly, they proposed a buried basalt platform with 2 orthogonally rising walls forming a three-dimensional corner. Their interpretation was architectural, functional, possibly ritual. But they made no claims beyond the data, and then nothing. The site was never excavated. The feature was never confirmed. The data remained undisturbed, as did the structure itself, now sealed beneath the pyramid, protected by time and inertia. 55 years passed. In those decades, Mesoamerican archaeology advanced in nearly every domain. LiDAR imaging transformed our understanding of settlement patterns. New inscriptions redefined timelines. Isotopic analysis tracked diets and migrations. But the magnetic anomaly at La Venta remained untouched, treated as an artifact of method, not of meaning. Yet, the data was never ambiguous. It didn't just suggest the presence of something, it described it with physical clarity. A dense body, magnetically active, precisely shaped. A configuration that did not match randomness, collapse, or natural variation. It had edges, it had depth, it had intent. What no one asked was the simplest question. What kind of structure would be buried in an earthen mound made of basalt and still producing a strong, coherent magnetic field decades, if not millennia, later? What kind of structure would not just disturb a field, but generate one? What kind of structure would need to be oriented, shaped, and positioned in space in order to function? And more than that, function as what? Not a tomb, not a chamber, not an altar, a field engine, a space of convergence, a device. When we return to the magnetic survey of 1969 with a clear scientific lens and without inherited assumptions about what ancient architecture ought to be, we find ourselves presented with a set of conditions that are not mysterious, but exacting. We have first, a structure 3 massive basalt blocks arranged in a triadic orthogonal configuration, one forming a flat base and 2 rising as vertical walls along adjacent sides. This is not artistic irregularity or collapsed masonry. The angles are precise, the composition is deliberate, the geometry is sufficient to define a three-dimensional space. Second, we have a magnetic field. It is not a diffuse trace, nor a chaotic remnant. It is coherent, dipolar, focused. It emerges from this configuration with clarity, detectable through the overlying Earth even after thousands of years. The field is localized, intense, and internally structured. Third, we have time and permanence. These stones have not moved. Their orientations have held. Whatever remnant magnetization was present when they were first placed has been preserved by mass and inertia. No subsequent construction disturbed them. They remain locked in position and preserved within the core of the pyramid. This gives us a system 3 stationary, magnetically active elements, arranged to create a stable field interaction. From this we can deduce, not speculate, deduce, that the space defined by this configuration is itself a field environment, one where the magnetic vectors of each block combine, interfere, and structure the space around them. In simple terms, this arrangement would have created an observable magnetic zone, not ambient magnetism, but structured behavior, directional force, gradient intensity, vector superposition. The space surrounding the triad would contain zones of attraction, regions of opposition, points of directional cancellation. Any magnetically responsive material placed within this volume would behave differently depending on its position and orientation, exactly as we would expect from the overlapping fields of three fixed sources. These are not symbolic effects, they are physical. They can be modeled. The combination of orthogonally arranged remnant vectors creates a bounded field topology with measurable characteristics. The structure generates a stable vector environment. This, then, is the triadic insight. Given three fixed magnetic bodies arranged along orthogonal axes, the resulting space is not neutral, it is active. It contains information. It is structured by force. We are not required to assume more. What we can say now, with confidence, is that this structure does something, and what it does is defined not by belief, but by physics. So, to understand the purpose of the structure at La Venta, we need to work backwards. We need to consider the basic understandings evidenced by its construction and figure out what they had to have known. Then, we can work forward to their intentions. It starts as an irregularity. One kind of stone, when placed near metal, behaves differently, not dramatically, just enough to raise the skin. A flake of iron-rich sand twists on the surface of water. A sharpened tool drifts slightly from its resting point. Sometimes it clings, sometimes it repels, but always it moves without contact. This is not yet understood, but it is noticed. The people who notice it are not looking for wonders. They are workers, masons, toolmakers. But the moment the effect is seen, it is recognized as behavior, a consistent force, a reaction tied to something within the stone itself. It is heavy, dense, coarse-grained, shot through with a subtle gleam that catches under sunlight. Later, it will be called basalt. They don't yet think of magnetism. They think of force, a property that doesn't require heat or motion. It just is, a kind of presence. This realization breaks something open. Until now, every tool, every action has required a hand, a push, a tether. But this is action at a distance. It cannot be explained by wind or weight or water. And so they do what every careful mind does when it meets a new principle. They test. They pass metal near the stone again. The motion repeats. They turn the stone. The motion changes. They bring two stones together, and suddenly, something new happens. Two of the stones interact, not with each other, but through the space between them. Push them close enough and they resist. Flip one and it snaps inward. Set a metal object between them and it doesn't move in a line. It veers, spirals, hesitates. Now the force is no longer confined to the object, it becomes a system. Two sources act at once and the result is not the sum of parts, it is something different, something emergent. This changes everything. These aren't just stones with unusual properties. They are elements, participants in a relationship that takes shape in space. You can't isolate one from the other. You have to think in terms of interaction. And interaction means direction. They begin to turn the stones deliberately. They mark their sides, fix their positions, try to hold them in place. Over time, they learn that each stone has a preferred orientation, an axis along which its invisible force moves. And when two of these axes are set in relation, the space between becomes charged with new behavior. Some arrangements amplify, others weaken, some collapse entirely. This is not random. This is structure. What they have now is not just motion, but structure. They begin to understand that the force lives in space. It is not just tied to the stone, but radiates from it. And where two such stones act together, the space between them bends. They find that a metal object responds not only to how far it is from a stone, but from which direction. They pass flakes across the space and trace invisible contours. They rotate a simple tool and watch its axis shift. Sometimes the force turns it gently, sometimes sharply, sometimes not at all. They are no longer observing behavior, they are mapping a field. This field cannot be seen, but it can be felt, measured, repeated. It is invisible, but not unknowable. And once its presence is accepted, a new kind of thinking begins. They no longer ask only what the stone does, but where it does it, and under what configuration of forces. At first the goal is control, but control leads to pattern. They realize that if the stones are arranged in specific spatial relationships, the behaviors repeat more cleanly. Distance matters, orientation matters, angle matters. They begin to place stones on fixed lines. They draw grids on the ground. They find that the simplest regularities, squares, diagonals, right angles, yield the most stable responses. They begin to experiment with the ratios between stones. One step here, two there, halfway between. The field changes, sometimes it strengthens, sometimes it drops away entirely. They begin to isolate key distances, harmonic positions where the interactions lock into place. Geometry is no longer abstract. It is empirical. They learn that the shape of the space between the stones determines what the force does. This leads to the most profound insight yet. The behavior of a system is not in its parts, but in their arrangement. Now they try with 3 stones. 2 creates push and pull. 3 creates something else, something living. 3 stones placed in relation begin to define a full space. There is no longer a single line of action. There are zones, places where one force dominates, where 2 cancel, where all 3 combine. They find that even small adjustments shift the whole. The system becomes dynamic. The space behaves like a body, and for the first time they realize, to understand a field, you must construct a triad. Not 2 points, not a single axis, but 3. 3 directions, 3 forces, 3 sources, each shaping and reshaping the space between. This is not symbolism, this is necessity. And from this necessity comes the foundation of everything that follows, their logic, their ratios, their architecture, their understanding of balance and opposition and convergence. All of it begins here, in the moment when 3 forces are set in relation, and the space between them begins to speak. Once you understand that magnetic forces act across space, that they shift, bend, and interfere with one another, you recognize a practical problem. Fields are delicate. They respond to orientation, to distance, to angle, and when your stones are small, even a breeze can turn them. The pattern slips, the field collapses. So the first design constraint becomes obvious: stability. To study a field, to return to it, to understand its shape, it must hold still. That is not optional. It is foundational. And so your thinking shifts. You no longer focus on the stones as objects, but on the space between them. The field as a consequence of the relation. A subtle change in position changes everything. If one stone moves, the pattern shifts. So they must not move. Not one, not any. The entire configuration must be fixed. You already know the basic structure. 2 stones form an axis. Their interaction defines a single direction. Push and pull, back and forth. The behavior is simple. Too simple. Add a third and everything changes. Zones emerge. Some where forces cancel, some where they twist, others where they intensify. The space stops behaving like a line and starts behaving like a field. So the system must be triadic, not just for complexity but for completeness. Now your goal is no longer exploration, it is construction. You are no longer discovering effects, you are assembling conditions. You're not trying to find a powerful stone. You're building a machine that produces a structured field, one that behaves predictably because its internal geometry has been stabilized. But that system must also be durable. A small structure is fragile. The tiniest motion throws it off. If you want to study it, test it. Return to it again and again. The system must be large enough to resist disruption. And more than that, it must be large enough to inhabit, to walk inside, to feel gradients shift beneath your hand, to locate the balance point not by theory but by touch. Now scale is not a challenge. It is a solution. Mass becomes precision. Heavy stones don't drift in the night. They don't rotate under stress. They preserve their alignment because they resist interference. The larger the system, the more reliably it holds. And material choice is no longer uncertain. You've already worked with stones that carry magnetic force. You know how to test them, how to read the subtle directional pull. Some stones, dense, dark, iron-rich, already show a preferred axis. That becomes part of the plan. You don't just carve the shape, you align the substance. The vector already inside the stone becomes one of the vectors inside the field. So now the pieces come together. Material, tested, selected, directional. Configuration, fixed in space, triadic in form. Orientation, matched for function, aligned by design. You know the system must be built with intent, because every angle becomes a condition of the space. Every axis becomes a feature of the field. What you are designing is not symbolic. It is not monumental, it is not ceremonial. It is a field engine. A device for storing and transmitting force through space. And most importantly, it's not built for you. It is built so that anyone, at any time, can enter that same configuration and witness the same effects. To pass a thread or a sliver of iron or a flake of sand and see the structure revealed through movement. The field does the teaching. The arrangement explains itself. No words required. Only presence, only motion, only attention. And so you build it to last, so that long after you are gone, others may walk into the same space, see the same lines twist and turn, and understand, not because someone told them, but because the stones show them. That is how insight becomes structure. Structure becomes memory, and memory becomes knowledge that endures without speech. And it appears they gained a lot of knowledge, which brings us to the Buga sphere. It fell from the sky in Colombia, intact, cool to the touch. No blast, no burn, no impact crater, just a dark, metallic object, coated in a black residue and wrapped in mystery. At first, it seemed anomalous, out of place. But the more we looked, the more it began to fit. Because the moment we heard it hadn't burned on re-entry, that it was sealed, layered, protected, and still active, we realized we weren't looking at a random event. We were looking at the final element, the missing part of the triad. The sphere led us back to the structure at La Venta, and that structure, when seen through the lens of modern field physics, became something we hadn't considered, a static magnetic generator, capable not just of creating a space to study invisible forces, but of participating in a system with something else. The Buga sphere wasn't the beginning of the mystery, it was the key to understanding its purpose. Because what comes down must have gone up. So we asked the question, how did it get up there? And the answer, surprisingly, begins not with modern propulsion, but with ancient principles. Because if you understand magnetic fields the way they clearly did, if you know how to generate them, how to shape them, how to embed orientation into matter, then you don't need fire, you don't need pressure, you need interaction. Here's what we believe happened. First, they built the field. That came first. The triadic configuration at La Venta, 3 massive basalt stones, each naturally magnetized, selected and aligned so that their internal vectors intersected in 3-dimensional space. Once placed, the structure produced a standing field, stable, coherent, directional. It was both engine and classroom. It showed them how fields behaved, but more than that, it gave them a platform for action. Then came the sphere. We don't know what's inside it, but we do know it was prepared. It was designed to be small enough to move, strong enough to survive space, and sealed in a way that implies pressure, reaction, containment. On its surface, investigators found a black, tar-like residue, an adhesive coating designed to absorb heat during re-entry, reduce thermal signature in orbit, and mask reflectivity. It was, in every sense, a return capsule, built to be invisible, built to survive, built to wait. But before it could wait, it had to launch. And the launch was not an explosion, it was a release. Inside the sphere, we now believe a slow-building reaction was set in motion. Chemical, electromagnetic, or even piezoelectric in nature, designed to generate a sudden magnetic pulse, a burst strong enough to repel against the static field of the triad structure. Think of it this way. You build up potential energy inside the sphere, and then, at the right moment, you let it go. Not into a blast, but into a vector-aligned magnetic discharge. That discharge meets the standing field of the triad, fixed, stable, massive. And the result is repulsion, acceleration, the same principle as a railgun, the same basic idea as Lorentz force acceleration, except scaled for one launch, one payload, one return. They didn't need it to reach the stars, just to reach space. High enough to orbit, high enough to store knowledge safely above Earth's surface and return. And when it did, it would land safely. The coating would protect it, the design would guide it, and the materials, layered, resilient, would make sure it arrived unbroken. We can imagine the final moment. The night they released it, the structure would have been aligned, every stone checked, every orientation recalibrated. The sky would have been watched for signs, the crossing of stars, the rise of a planet, the close of a cycle. The sphere, held in its cradle, would have been turned by hand, rotated until the vector inside matched the field without. The tension would have been palpable. Not fear, reverence. The elders would have spoken, but briefly. Their words didn't need to carry instructions. The instructions were already built, into the field, into the form, into the force. When the moment came, the discharge would have been silent, or perhaps it cracked like lightning inside stone. But the sphere would have moved, first trembling, then lifting, then gone, rising into a dark sky, vanishing without fire, without trace. If you want someone to pay attention, you don't send just one message, you send several. You create a pattern, you time it deliberately, you build it into your culture, your calendar, your stories, so that when the moment finally comes, it will echo through memory. And there's no question they cared about timing, because their calendar didn't end randomly. It ended exactly when they wanted our attention back on the sky. And then the spheres began to return. The first major event happened in Namibia in 2011. A single metallic sphere, solid, carefully manufactured, and untouched by flame, landed in a remote grassland. It was a perfect opening, singular, inexplicable, undeniable. No known industry claimed it, no military identified it. It simply appeared. An event designed not just to be mysterious, but to unsettle us. A signal that the world might be changing, that perhaps time itself had begun to run out. Then, shortly after, in the same year, Zambia. Not one this time, but 3 spheres falling separately, dispersed. Again, perfectly intact, smooth, silent, the arrival of a triad. The moment you see 3, you recognize intention. 3 is not coincidence. 3 implies arrangement, geometry, logic. 3 spheres falling from the sky hint at design, not accidental debris, but something arranged, coordinated, timed. Then came Vietnam in 2015. Again, 3 spheres, again precisely delivered. Now a pattern emerged, and people began to notice something deeper. Triads arriving after a solitary sphere. First Namibia alone, then Zambia threefold, now Vietnam again in 3. The message, still unclear, took shape in our imaginations as something otherworldly. Not random fragments of forgotten technology, but intentional signals, perhaps from above, from somewhere else. By 2022, India joined the sequence. Several metallic spheres again appeared rapidly, unmistakably deliberate. Another triad, again reinforcing a structure, a logic. At this point, global attention turned fully to the possibility of alien visitation. After all, how else could we explain manufactured objects appearing silently without burning, scattered across continents? And that was precisely their intention. Because when the Buga sphere arrived in Colombia in 2025, another solitary sphere, carefully sealed, deliberately coated in black adhesive to mask its orbit and protect it from re-entry, our thoughts turned first, inevitably, to extraterrestrial origins. Aliens became not just a fantasy, but the easiest explanation. But the spheres were arranged in a pattern too elegant for accident, and too intimately tied to human symbolism to be truly alien. One sphere alone in Namibia, 3 in Zambia, 3 in Vietnam, 3 in India, and then another solo sphere in Colombia, the Buga sphere. Look closely, and what emerges is not just a sequence, but a structure. One sphere stands alone, then triads appear repeatedly. Then another single sphere returns, almost as if these ancient minds anticipated the ways we'd interpret them. Because what do these spheres communicate? First, they speak to fear. They fall mysteriously, intact, strange, precisely timed to echo ancient warnings about the end of the world. They match exactly the calendar that ended in 2012, a deliberate callback to a time when humanity anxiously wondered about apocalypse. Then they move to wonder the sudden appearance of clearly manufactured objects falling from the sky, intact, no heat, no burn, objects we naturally attribute to extraterrestrial technology because they seem beyond our current understanding. But finally, and perhaps most importantly, they speak of ourselves. Hidden within these spheres are unmistakably human symbols. Early analyses of the Buga sphere revealed embedded geometry resembling Stonehenge, a deeply human reference, a hint to look not upward to alien skies but inward, toward Earth and our own forgotten capabilities. The message moves deliberately, first fear, then wonder, and finally reconnection to our ancestors whose knowledge of magnetic fields, of geometry, of force and energy, allowed them to send messages forward through time itself. And when we recognized this, the location made sense. Because the Buga sphere led us back to the magnetic triad at La Venta. It revealed the method, a static field generator, aligned perfectly to launch a sphere into orbit and ensure its eventual return. Not alien at all, but entirely terrestrial, entirely human. Our own ancient science come home, and yet the pattern isn't complete. One sphere alone, Namibia, then 3 triads, Zambia, Vietnam, India, then again one sphere alone, Colombia, the Buga sphere. It leaves us waiting. One more sphere is still out there. One more return remains. And the question now is not who sent it, we know that answer. The question is, where will the final sphere land? Because when it does, the triad will be complete again, and then perhaps we'll truly understand the message our ancestors have left for us, sealed in stone, launched through fields, carried by spheres, and delivered through time itself. They knew we'd be watching, and now we are.